Welcome back to The Honest Media. I'm Tom Pappert, and I'm here with Dan Lyman, who I told you would be joining us. What I didn't tell you is that he is in sunny Florida, making us all jealous as he soaks up some sun. And Dan is now a writer with InfoWars. The last time he was on the show, we mentioned he had some big news coming up the pike, and this is it. He's at InfoWars now. He's a big league journalist traveling all across the United States, currently camped out in his home of Florida, soaking up some sun because this is our one solace. We may be cold here in Kansas, but he's typically from Iceland. So, Dan, how are you today?
I'm great. It's nice to be here with a little warm weather, a break from the Icelandic long winter. So I'm down here visiting family and spending the holidays. So all is well.
Well, good deal. I appreciate you taking the time out of your vacation to come on the show.
My pleasure.
So 2016, the current year has really just been one for the record books, right? What is your impression or thoughts now that we're getting to the end of the current year?
I would say this is definitely the biggest news year on record. I would imagine. I'm sure that there were years, during the World Wars that were maybe more going on possibly, but there were only, a couple media outlets at that time, and there wasn't the internet and radio shows like yours and podcasts and all that stuff. So this is definitely the year to be a journalist and to be someone who's kind of a news junkie, because it was like every day there was something bigger than the last day, and every week there was at least one thing that went down that would have been, major news for an entire year's worth of news in the past, let's say. So it was quite a year, no question.
And it does make you wonder, you mentioned in the past news happened and there was stuff like this, but I almost wonder if it's just because the internet, the alternative media, people like yourself at InfoWars, and you're kind enough to put me in the basket of deplorables as well, but people like us, it makes you wonder how much news people just missed out on because there weren't journalists out there willing to cover it.
Absolutely. It's very interesting that we are now able to, let's say, debunk the mainstream fake news media in real time, which is something that we weren't able to do in the past. So it does make you wonder things that were happening back when there was just the Walter Cronkite era, when everyone kind of had to hang on every last word, and that was all they really had to go with, unless they had some other source of information. But now we can look at these narratives and we can pick them apart and present alternate evidence, and also blow a lot of these stories out of the water, which is happening every day as well, which is definitely the blessing of the age of information.
Absolutely, and they can call us fake news all they want. It's all they're doing is projecting. Leftists always project, and it's really been just an unprecedented year. I know you've got a big list of events that you've been recounting, and we just confirmed a couple things. I mean, this year we've seen the loss of Scalia. We've seen the end of 12, count them 12, Republican debates. We've seen the Clinton crime syndicate fade into obscurity. We've seen the death of Harambe. It's just been a nonstop avalanche of stuff coming at us. R.I.P. Harambe.
Yeah, it's definitely been wild. I mean, obviously the presidential election takes the cake. There was nothing that outdid that this year. Definitely the most contentious, wildest presidential election in American history. But also, just the way that things kicked off. I was just looking back through what happened this year, because I almost have a issue or problem differentiating what happened this year and what happened slightly, towards the end of last year, because I think for a lot of us, the way that we've kind of blocked off our memory of the news is about 18 months long, because that's when the presidential election really started. So from there, just so many different things blend into each other. But I was looking back, and the Malheur refuge standoff, that started right at the beginning of this year. That was a massive news story. I mean, that was kind of unprecedented in a way. We got a taste of that with the Bundy Ranch situation, but this year was like a whole new version of that, and for similar reasons, and I think a lot of the Bundys are still in jail, if I'm not mistaken, from that. But that was what really kicked off the news, and everyone was watching that with bated breath.
Right.
And then from there, we just rolled on into just the wildest year. I mean, you had even the Democratic race was kind of crazy, which we kind of knew at the time, but Hillary Clinton was actively stealing it from Bernie Sanders the whole time, which was revealed later on in the WikiLeaks. But I think that if Bernie Sanders had actually gotten the nomination, we might have seen a completely different general election. It was much different crowd that was supporting Bernie than Hillary.
Absolutely, and I still have to believe Trump was going to win. I know you and some other very intelligent people think, the stars kind of all aligned for Trump, but Bernie bros just didn't vote. That's part of the problem. But it's really just, you're absolutely right. In the last 18 months, the current year, the joke we always make that I don't know how many of my viewers really understand, John Oliver's key argument for the whole of 2015 was, it's 2015! It's 2015! And so then the joke became the current year. And I find it interesting we're still making this joke at the end of 2016 because, it's the current year after all. How can you possibly not support Trump? It's the current year. But what do you think has been, aside from the presidential election or even within the presidential election, what's been the biggest news story of 2016 or even the last 18 months?
Well, I think there are a few, and they apply to, let's say, different people. The situation in Europe with the Muslim refugees, we know a lot of them are jihadist economic migrants, so refugee isn't really an accurate term, but the mainstream fake media still uses that term to evoke feelings of sympathy for these people from the low info cucks out there. But I think that's really a big story because now we're starting to see the fruits of that labor. Let's say Europe is experiencing massive terrorist attacks on a pretty regular basis now, the most recent being what just happened in Berlin. But you also have what happened in Turkey with the Russian ambassador. And the same day there was something else that went on at a mosque in Zurich, Switzerland. You had the Nice truck attack earlier in the year. These are just follow-ups, like on the Bataclan attack. Bataclan, yes, terrorist attack at the end of 2015.
Right.
And they're just getting more frequent and they're getting worse. And so I think many folks understand that what happens in Europe can eventually happen in the United States and that we should look there to see what our future looks like in many ways. But at the same time, this is causing this massive populist revolt across the West, and we're starting to see that. We have that obviously happened here with Donald Trump, but earlier in the year we had Brexit. That was a massive shift in the political paradigm for England. We also had the election in Austria, which I think pretty clearly was manipulated the second time around. But that was another indicator that the globalists don't necessarily have a grip on everything. We have Geert Wilders in the Netherlands is leading the pack there for the presidential or prime ministerial election. Le Pen in France. So we're definitely starting to see a swing, the populist overtake of the West trying to reclaim our societies and our countries back from the globalist agenda. So that's a really huge development this year. And then also towards the end of this year, excuse the excess noises, towards the end of this year is when really the war on the fake media came about. And I think that was well forewarned of by Matt Drudge last year in his interview with InfoWars at the studio. He said next year is the year that they're going to come for free speech and the free media. And that is starting to actually happen now. And it is basically the legacy media, which is the corporate media, which is the globalist mouthpieces. They are actively at war with the truth media.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that we always get everything right, but we're absolutely trying our best at all times to be accurate, as opposed to them who are actively trying at all times to subdue the truth, spin the information, and keep people in the dark. So that war has kicked off this year, and that's going to continue on for quite some time.
Well, and you mentioned the legacy media and Trump and all of this, and all I have to say is thank God it's Trump and not Clinton, because if it was Clinton, they might actually be successful in this war against what they deem to be the fake news as they put out the fake news. And maybe we can talk about BuzzFeed's fall from greatness in the next segment. But I think you honed on to something excellent there. It's the rise of populism, the rise of nationalism, of a rejection of everything that we've been force-fed for the past several decades. I think you're absolutely right. That is the major story of 2016. We've got to take a quick break. We'll be right back after the commercials. I'm here with Dan Lyman. He's of InfoWars, and you're watching The Honest Media with Tom Pappert. I'll be right back. Welcome back to The Honest Media. I'm here with Dan Lyman of InfoWars, and we're discussing some of the biggest stories of 2016, of the current year. Now that we're almost out of time, we've got about a week and a half left of 2016, and it has been one insane ride. As we were saying, we've seen the rise of populism, the rise of nationalism, the return to normalcy, and I wonder, in a sick sense, if we can actually thank Angela Merkel for a lot of this, because I don't know if we would be seeing this kind of pushback without this woman, and of course the United States for destabilizing the Middle East, but without this woman destroying her own country, Europe, and bringing the European Union down as a whole. I don't know if we would be seeing this. What do you think?
Well, you're right. Actually, technically, the year started off on the wrong foot in Cologne, Germany, where we had over 1,000 women were sexually assaulted by, they call themselves Merkel's guests, the migrants and jihadists that are just pouring into that country. I think the number is somewhere around 1 million this year alone that have come into the country, which is just unbelievable. And it really makes you think, why do the Germans seem to have this predilection toward self-destruction? This is the third time in a century they've been a part of destroying their own country while also destroying a lot of Europe. So it just makes you wonder, because they're such smart, intelligent, fastidious, hardworking people. I don't understand why they fall into this pit. But this time around, I don't know how they dig themselves out of it, because they've set themselves up for a civil war, if they even fight back at all. And if they don't, their country is going to go full-on Sharia. It is in some places already. You have the no-go zones. You have Sharia police walking around enforcing Sharia on tourists and also Germans. You have Germans that are now leaving the country, moving to countries like Hungary to get away from Germany because it's turning into such a nightmare. Obviously, the Berlin attack was a couple days ago, but that's just one of many. That was one of the more high profile, but they're happening every day there. There's people getting stabbed and raped, assaulted, killed. It's unbelievable. So I can't imagine where it goes for them, but there's no outlook, in my opinion, that is rosy.
I think you're absolutely right. And one part of 2016 that correlates exactly to what you said is John Kerry coming out, I believe it was Kerry, and saying, it would help if the media wouldn't talk about these terrorists. It would help if they would ignore these horrible terrorist attacks and pretend they're not happening. And I think after he said that, you can tell me what you think, certainly, but it seems like the reporting kind of stopped. It wasn't a terrorist attack, it was a truck attack. Or they just wouldn't talk about it at all, as you mentioned. Is that something that is happening in what they think is the real media?
Well, I do think that there's an element to probably the timing of that, but I think it's just John Kerry being an idiot and letting the cat out of the bag when we know that that's what they're working towards behind the scenes. But Kerry tends to say things that make him put his foot in his mouth. I don't know if he feels shame about saying these things at all, but clearly he's blowing their cover. So we know that those things have already been happening. We know that, a former member of the Stasi is now in charge of Facebook patrol to see who's saying negative things about, who's coming in and out of the country. You have state-sponsored commercials in Germany now that are pushing women to try wearing the hijab if they don't normally, to, multi-culti, and they say it in this really bizarre German accent. And I've watched the commercials. They're really, really, really weird, but they're trying to brainwash Germans into just accepting this as the new culture, and if you don't, you're a racist and a bigot and a xenophobe.
Well, of course, in Germany, there are accounts of people who, in private closed Facebook groups where you're not supposed to be able to be seen by the public, they will say things that are just brutally honest. We'll put it that way. They're not wrong by any sense of the imagination. And these people actually end up going to court and being found guilty and having to pay fines because they had conservative opinions that were essentially there's a word we use for it online, but anti-refugee. Maybe it has to do with what they did on the beginning of this year. And I think that Germany, maybe that's the one big takeaway. It may be lost. I don't know if there's anything left. And I keep coming back to this in Europe in general, but in the United States, at least, I think we've got a good outlook. I think that we're going to be able to stop the tide. That's my honest hope. I'm not going to pretend there was a question in there, but what do you think? I think you're right. And I think especially, a lot of them, as we mentioned earlier, are really shopping for benefits. They're looking for the best welfare that they can get onto because they can make more in a year on welfare in Germany than they can make in 20 years working as hard as they possibly can back home in, say, Somalia or Iraq or wherever they come from.
Or even work.
Or even working. That's absolutely right. You think American welfare is bad? My God, read about these people. American students can go to Germany and just be a student for free. Yeah, that is not a recipe for disaster somehow. I wonder, and we've got about a minute and a half left in the segment, then we need to take a break, but do you think this year marks the death of the mainstream media's ability to feed us narratives?
Definitely, they have lost their power over the people. Let's say they still have plenty of people that pay attention to them and that buy their narrative, but those people are becoming fewer, and the grip on them is either tightening on a small segment of people who will never release, never be released from that hold. But the divide is now widening, where it's very clear who is a sheep to the mainstream narrative and who is either seeking more information or isn't under that spell, or the camp of people who are getting their information elsewhere from the truth media, alternative media, whatever you want to call it. That camp is getting much larger. You have essentially have Breitbart in the White House now, which is amazing because they do great reporting and they are doing their best to tell the truth at all times, even if, like I said, not everyone gets it right every single time, but that's just part of how the media works. You're not always going to be right. The mainstream legacy media is wrong constantly, and when they even do offer a retraction, it's buried weeks later. So it's we're doing our best in the alternative media, and we're just blowing them out of the water, and that's why people are coming our way.
You're absolutely right. And we got to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Dan Lyman. This is the digital media. This is the honest media even. We are digital, though. That's our thing. We'll be right back after the break. This is the honest media. I'm Tom Pappert. Welcome back to The Honest Media. I'm Tom Pappert here with Dan Lyman, and we are discussing the ups, the downs, the highlights of 2016. And in the break, Dan brought up something that I haven't forgot about it. Rather, I try to ignore it. But the absurd transgender politics that's happening right now. And Dan, can you just take it away on this topic?
Well, I think this is the year when we moved from LGB rights, whatever those might be, and that agenda. So they got gay marriage, great. Then they moved on to the next thing because they never stopped. Now it's a transgender agenda. And the transgender, you could call it. You have Target, openly saying we're going to let whoever wants to use whatever bathroom they want to. That created quite a backlash. I think they paid the price for that in their retail sales and also on the stock market, if I'm not mistaken. Took a pretty drastic dip. I don't know how it's recovered since then, but most recently you have the cover of National Geographic has like some little boy with pink hair talking about how great it is that he can be a girl now. You have all these stories coming out this year of parents that are either pushing their children to do hormone therapy or allowing them to. In both cases, I think that is absolutely a crime. There's no way it's child abuse. Those decisions need to be made later on down the road when they're adults and can make them for themselves. It's gotten really weird on that front. And I think it's just something that they're trying to push onto us to continue driving their agenda further and further because leftists push their agenda. They're never satisfied. They're never okay. They need to cross, through checkpoints and then move on to the next thing. And they do have it mapped out, So that's where we're at now. I think that's something that definitely needs to be pushed back against. By all means, there are some certain medical cases of people, having some issues, hermaphrodites and whatnot. But in general, the transgender agenda is about mental illness, and it's totally bizarre. So that's one thing that just needs to be quashed and put away for good. Now, and we can do that if we just treat it as illogical.
Absolutely. Now, I have kind of two questions that relate to this. The first, do you think, because I've seen this in my personal life, do you think that gay people, that I'm not talking about the transgenders, I'm talking about the LGB part of the spectrum, not this LGBT WTF barbecue, but do you think the mainstream homosexuals, the gays, lesbians, are drifting away from the Democrats in the face of all this absurdity. Because I think we're seeing some of this with Milo Yiannopoulos. He had his massive party. And then my second question is, are conservatives, is 2016 the year that conservatives finally learned the power of the dollar when it comes to boycotts?
Sure. I mean, back to your first question, definitely I think there's a paradigm shift occurring right now. And for many different reasons, but one of them, a great example, will be the Orlando nightclub shooting. You had a lot of gay folks that said, you know what, maybe it's not so great to have open borders and have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people who have no compunction with throwing gay people off roofs simply for being gay coming into the country. And Hillary Clinton made it quite clear that she would be escalating that by up to 550% over what Obama's already doing. And in general, we don't really know what the numbers are. They say 10,000. I think they're sticking 10,000 in individual cities. I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg. And then in terms of the power of the dollar, I think we are starting to see that, because I think a lot of people, conservatives and just, rational-minded Americans, are sick of the economic warfare that is waged against people who, let's say, you had the CEO of Mozilla donated like $1,000 to a cause that he believed in, which he believed that, marriage is between a man and a woman. And in California, there was a Proposition 8 that was being, battled on both sides. And he contributed quietly to the cause that he believed in. And as soon as he was outed on that, they ran him right out of town immediately. You have the gay wedding stuff with bakers and pizza shops and whatnot. And anytime a story like that gets pushed out to the front, they suffer the wrath of the whole entire world, essentially, in just really disgusting fashion, and death threats, and it's just wild. So I think at this point, conservatives in general are not as unhinged and violent as leftists, and they're not going to go throwing around death threats. Not saying that a few might not, but in general, we prefer to economic warfare as well. And we're not going after mom and pop businesses. We're going after big global corporations that are pushing agendas that we don't necessarily agree with, such as you have Kellogg's that recently pulled all their advertising from Breitbart by saying that Breitbart and its readers, who number 45 million strong, are white supremacists, white nationalists. What a slander, what a slur, and how many of them were already Kellogg's customers. So
absolutely,
the backlash against Kellogg's has been powerful. We found out that Kellogg's is funding Black Lives Matter and other operations like that. So it's our turn to, personally, I believe strongly in supporting buy local whenever you can, buy American made whenever you can. That should just be our goal in general. So by doing so, we can navigate the waters a little more easily than buying from these multinational combines.
I think you're right. And it's not just Kellogg's. Like you mentioned Target. There's Kellogg's, of course. BMW has been targeted by some. Pepsi has been targeted by some, which of course means no more Taco Bell, no Doritos. And people are really getting involved with this. It's not like, when the left boycotts something, it seems to work for a couple of months and then they forget. I remember as a small child, the left was boycotting Walmart because of something or another, and now as an adult, they're boycotting Walmart again because Walmart doesn't pay what they call a living wage. And it's like, well, maybe if your first boycott hadn't been so pointless, and maybe if some more people had stuck with it, you wouldn't be boycotting them for essentially the same thing 10 years later. So we're running out of time, but I wanted you to kind of give us what else you think. We've covered what's going on in the Middle East and now Europe, which is becoming an extension of the Middle East. We've covered kind of the revolt against the mainstream media, their war against the truth tellers, the real media of the world. We've covered the power of the dollar, the transgender lobby. What else do you think are the main takeaways from 2016?
2016, obviously, you have an escalation with what I would say is a fake Cold War against Russia. When you can talk about that for hours, Russia does not seem to be someone that we need to really be worried about. We should be worried more with mending relations with them, and they seem pretty excited about that with the incoming president, who has expressed no ill will towards Russia and also not really any warm feelings either. Let's just both agree to stay out of each other's business, as I believe that we should, and generally the United States in general should stay out of other people's business, and they should stay out of ours. So I would say that the whole situation with Russia is coming to a head. I think these assassinations this week earlier this week are an indicator that things continue to escalate. I think they will push that as far as they can up until the day President Trump takes office and maybe beyond. So that's definitely something interesting. But as we've seen in the last couple of days, Syria, the Assad government has made a lot of progress in retaking Syria back from NATO-backed Islamists that are there. These rebel insurgents. No, they're just they're CIA trained. They're American funded. They're British funded. So. Really, it is a proxy war that's been going on between us and Russia and Syria and Iran in Syria. Unfortunately, for the Syrian people who have had to go through that. And one other big thing that I think that has escalated this year is the war on police. Far more killings this year already than there were last year. And a lot of them are now going unreported because they become kind of just so commonplace. I see one almost every day now, and up to 4 sometimes shootings, and they don't even get reported anymore. Beyond just local media or anyone who's keeping track of that stuff. So I think that's something that we need to not forget about, because these are our wonderful law enforcement that are like between us and the criminals at any given moment. If they keep getting killed, they're going to be less likely to be working these jobs. So hopefully the Law and Order Presidency administration will give them renewed confidence and support them again in kind of rebuilding their morale in general.
Agreed. Hopefully we can reverse what's being called the Ferguson Effect, where police officers no longer want to patrol the dangerous neighborhoods in big cities that really need them the most. And it's because of this Black Lives Matter rhetoric, the killings of police officers. We saw it in Dallas. We've seen it in New York. It's been all over the place. It's been all across the South, Kansas City even. It's as you say, it's every single day. It's 365 days a year. And I sincerely hope, and I think it's going to happen. I think we're going to see a strong reversal with Trump. And I hope that we really can get our police to be respected again by the community at large and by the media. Well, Dan, thank you so much for joining us. I know you're taking time out of your beautiful vacation out there in Florida. You've been all over the place. You visited the InfoWars studio in let's see, they are in Austin. Am I correct on that? In Austin, Texas. You've been all over the United States. You've been in Iceland. You've been in Europe. You're truly turning into an international journalist, and I'm proud to have you on the show. Thank you so much, Dan Lyman.
My pleasure. Take care of yourself, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. All right, this has been The Honest Media. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will be back next week with our New Year's episode. I'm Tom Pappert, and I will be joined next week by Craig Chrysler. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next week.